Hi everyone, I'm Ermanno Petrocchi, a PhD candidate in AA Ethics at the University of Macerata, and welcome to my fourth class of the course Technology and Digitalization of Civic Participation. I'm going to share the slides and then we can start the class. All right. Today we're going to talk about bias, fairness, and surveillance capitalism. And this is a summary of the class. We're going to introduce and frame the problem of algorithmic bias and algorithmic fairness and surveillance. And then we will delve into the understanding of algorithmic bias, digital surveillance and control, and then the concept of surveillance capitalism. To conclude the class, we will try to respond to some challenges that have been advanced to the concept of surveillance capitalism. The objectives of this class are understanding how algorithmic bias is produced and reproduced in digital systems, AI-based digital systems, learn how these systems impact real people, especially vulnerable and marginalized communities, grasp the economic logic of surveillance capitalism and how it feeds algorithmic discrimination, and then explore the ethical, technical, and political solutions being proposed so far. So this is not the algorithmic bias is not just a technical issue, but it is a societal, political, and economic challenge. We can enter now section 1 to introduce the concept and the problem. What is algorithmic bias? The definition is that algorithmic bias is the systemic distortion or unfair treatment of individuals or groups by automated decision-making systems. And there are some key causes for this bias. Bias training data, when historical data reflect past discrimination, and then algorithms, of course, can learn and replicate these discriminations. Design flaws, when model assumptions or choices may favor dominant groups unintentionally, and lack of contextual awareness, because AI systems often lack understanding of social nuances or historical injustices. So we should think about this in this way. If we train a system on unjust data, then we don't get neutral decisions, but we get automated injustice. And this matters today because, as we saw also in our previous classes, AI systems now shapes decisions in many critical areas. Who gets a job? We have hiring algorithms. Who gets a loan? We have credit scoring tools. Who is watched or arrested? Maybe is due to predictive policing. Who gets medical care? These decisions are made on AI-based health diagnostic tools. And so when these tools are biased, of course, there are many problems here because they can exclude, misclassify, or harm individuals. They can scale discrimination invisibly, and they can reduce accountability. Because, for example, a doctor making a bad decision can say that the algorithm made the decision, the algorithm made that recommendation. I followed the recommendation of the suggestion of an algorithm. So this is all about systems embedded in our society that silently are shaping our lives. And the problem is intersectional because bias is not experienced equally. We can say the harms is often worse if it is considered, if we consider the intersections of sensitive features such as race and race and gender. These can happen in facial recognition systems, class and migration status, in fraud detection tools, and disability and economic status. And of course, it follows that if the bias is intersectional, then also the kind of discrimination is intersectional and may arise because of algorithms that compress complex identity into data points, because these are multi-level aspects that are compressed in just one identity of one user profile and another user profile. And so these systems are not designed to recognize and respect also differences. And in this sense, AI systems don't create inequality from scratch. This is an important aspect, but they amplify what's already there. And so for this reason, we are going to structure the class in this sense. We will delve into the concept of algorithmic bias and discrimination. So we will see how algorithms reflect, reinforce, and automate inequality. And then the concept of surveillance capitalism, that is the economic model behind data extraction and behavioral prediction. And then we will see some responses and solutions to these problems, such as technical fixes, legal frameworks, civic resistance, and policy ideas. So the central question of this class is, can algorithmic systems ever be fair? And this brings us to section two, understanding algorithmic bias. And this is an important question. Where does bias come from? The bias doesn't happen accidentally, but it's built into the system at multiple levels. In training data, when historical data reflect discriminations, then the algorithm will learn the pattern and will reproduce the same pattern. Labeling practices, because humans label the data and their judgments and stereotypes can become part of the problem, can be reproduced in the labeling practice. Model design choices, because prioritizing accuracy over fairness or speed over nuance affects the outcomes. And historical inequalities, because algorithms are trained on a world already shaped by inequality, and those inequalities are going to be reproduced, reinforced, and exacerbated. And so the key insight is that even neutral technology can replicate a biased world if it doesn't critically reflect on where its knowledge comes from. These are now some examples of data bias. The first one is omitted variable bias that occurs when a crucial factor is left out of the training dataset, and this will lead to misleading results. An example is the one of an algorithm predicting job performance that can only considers education levels and years of experience, but does not include access to reliable transportation. And then it therefore underestimates the impact of commuting challenges on attendance and performance, and particularly in the sense penalizing candidates from rural areas. And so we can see how the reduction to some data point doesn't represent the complexity of our world. So and why it matters? Because ignoring structural factors lead to incomplete, or unjust outcomes. And so a data set for training algorithms with omitted variables, but important, such as this one of commuting challenges, may naturally lead to unjust outcomes. Another example related to data sets, to data, is the minority bias. This occurs when the training data has too few examples from minority or protected groups, because maybe they are more difficult to collect. So the AI systems then don't learn how to handle them. And so facial recognition systems are an example. When are trained mostly on white male faces, they will perform poorly for Black women. And this will lead to a denial of access or misidentification. This matters because ignoring structural factors leads to incomplete or unjust outcomes, especially for vulnerable groups. We have another example of data bias, that is the informativeness bias. It occurs when the data lacks sufficient detail for some groups, reducing the system's predictive ability. An example is detecting melanoma in dark-skinned individuals is more difficult if the dataset lacks enough high-quality skin images with variation in tone. And then it matters because it will affect diagnosis accuracy, creating healthcare inequality. The last example of model biases is a bias, sorry. This is a different example because it doesn't concern the dataset, but the model itself. So assuming that the dataset is balanced, then we will also have possibility of biases because the model will act in uncontrolled way. And this is an example, the bias by proxy. This occurs when variables use extensions unintentionally encode protected attributes. The example is healthcare spending as a metric. In privatized systems, low spending may correlate with being from an ethnic minority, sorry. And this may become a proxy for race, even if race isn't used directly. Another example is the postal code. If we have the postal code directly doesn't explain the social status of a person, but then the model might be able to understand the different part of a city or of a country, and then from the postal code derive the income of that person. And so why this matters? Because creating indirect domination, seemingly neutral variables cause biased outcomes, such as neutral variables might be, in the example that I made, the postal code. We have another bias, but this now relates to the system use, is the automation bias, when users overtrust AI outputs, assuming that they are always correct, even when the model is wrong. For example, doctors might rely solely on AI cancer prediction tool and ignore other symptoms or alternative diagnoses. And this is matter because over-reliance reduces human oversight and errors go unchallenged. Another system use bias is the feedback loops. Because when the system's bias suggestion is accepted, then the incorrect output is going to feedback as a valid data, reinforcing the bias. So if the same doctor from the previous example trusts flawed AI predictions and confirm them, then the system will learn that its own mistake as something correct. And so bias gets amplified, not corrected in this sense over time. Now some example of this bias algorithm, algorithmic bias. The first one is facial recognition failures. Facial recognition systems by IBM, Microsoft, and Face++, and error rates up to 35% for dark-skinned women compared to less than 1% for light-skinned men. And these are just are not invented data, but these are proofs from previous systems. An implication are misidentification because people may be wrongly accused or detained. Invisibility, system may not recognize certain faces at all, and exclusion. Some users may be denied access to basic services, such as unlocking a phone, airport security, and job application. So biased performances leads to real-world harm, especially when used in law enforcement or public services. Another example is the hiring algorithms used by Amazon, which were designed to automate screening, penalize the resumes with the word women's, for example, women's chess club. Why? It learned from past hiring patterns that favored men. And the key point is that algorithms don't just reflect partners, they also learn to prefer them, even when they are unjust. So when trained on biased decisions, AI systems don't fix the problem, but they automate the very same problem. The compass example is maybe the most famous one, relating to criminal justice algorithms, because the compass was used in the US courts to predict the likelihood of reoffending. And black defendants were more likely to be falsely labeled at risk. White defendants instead were more likely to be falsely labeled low risk. So we can understand here the inequality of treatment, and the problems were opaque logic, because judges often didn't know how to score. The score was calculated, and the high stakes here because a biased score can affect someone's sentence or bail and then their lives. Algorithm used in criminal justice must be especially scrutinized, because the errors can cost people's freedom. Also in finance, we have some example. The credit scoring tools can infer risk from non-traditional data, such as shopping habits, zip codes, social networks connection, and then may penalize people from low-income areas or marginalized groups, even if they have no personal history of risk. And the result is a reinforcement of existing economic and racial inequalities. And alternative data in this sense may seem neutral, but the model can encode the unfairness there, because these alternative data represent decades of systemic discrimination. So there is no an alternative data or a neutral data. We should start our thinking from there. Indeed, this brings us to the myth of neutrality, because many assume that algorithms are objective. They aren't. They reflect human choices, which data to use, what counts as success, what trade-offs might be acceptable. So the bias can be baked in at every stage of development of AI-based technologies, and designers are never neutral. They bring their own values, assumptions, and blind spots. And so tech is not built in a vacuum, of course. It mirrors the society it's built in. We need, as a first step, to audit algorithms, evaluating how AI systems work, especially how they affect different groups, checking for disparate impact, bias, or unfair outcomes, and who should audit? Independent experts, civil society, and regulators, not just the companies that build the tools. In this sense, transparency becomes a key, because we cannot fix what we cannot see. And this will be important for what is called digital surveillance and digital control. What is digital surveillance today? It is a concept that refers to the continuous monitoring of individuals' behavior, movements, and interaction through digital technologies. There are many applications: facial recognition in public spaces, productivity monitoring softwares, behavioral tracking for targeting, and AI-based proctoring tools in schools. Sorry. And so surveillance is no longer limited to national security nowadays, but it pervades everyday life of every person. And why that? Because surveillance systems do not just observe, but they influence how we behave, how we act, what we like, and what we see. And real-time feedback shapes user behavior, as we saw in first class, thanks to mechanisms such as reinforcement learning. But we should also consider the chilling effect, that is the effect according to which people self-censors themselves when they know that they are watched, and profiling, that is the risk of discrimination based on opaque scoring systems. How this connect to the problem of algorithmic bias? Because if past behavior reflects social inequality, then algorithms will learn and replicate that inequality. Yeah, this is another example of social scoring. Social scoring represents rewards or punishments for citizens, such as travel bans and loan denial. And this example refers to the China's social credit scoring. And there are here some ethical issues because no transparency in scoring criteria. There is no redress or appeal mechanisms, and it normalizes automated moral judgment. And this is maybe the most important problem, the automated moral judgment for our society, in which there is a machines, there is an AI-based technology deciding if something is good or wrong. And this is another example in predictive policing. AI systems are used to predict crime-prone areas and risky individuals. And AI systems are often trained, as we mentioned before, on biased historical data, and then over-policing minority neighbors will lead in data loops. And of course, historically, minority neighborhoods are those where there are more crimes, and then this will exacerbate this problem. This will reinforce the stereotype according to which in these neighborhoods there are more crimes. And so systems then will reinforce these patterns and will replicate them in their automated judgments. So the result is that communities already over-policed will face higher algorithmic scrutiny. Another example comes from the workplace, in which algorithms can track keystrokes, webcam activity, email tone. And the purpose, of course, is optimizing productivity, but at what cost? There are some risks even here: erosion of trust in the workplace, lack of privacy, and unequal treatment of remote hybrid workers because they might be more surveyed. And also in the public sector, governments use algorithms to detect fraud and allocate benefits, basing these actions on shopping history, addresses, and social networks. But the effects are that poor and marginalized groups are disproportionately flagged, and this can result in a loss of benefits without appeal. So this makes us ask who watches the watchers, because these are key questions. Who has access to surveillance data? Are users aware of how they are monitored? Is there accountability when systems fail? And this answer to these questions is important to understand the power imbalance that is present here, because platforms and governments might operate in opaque ways, and then individuals will be left vulnerable with no control over how they are seen and judged. And this is what have been called surveillance capitalism. What is surveillance capitalism? This is a term that is has been coined by Shoshana Zuboff in 2019. And the definition is that a new economic system where human experience is turned into data to be monetized, predicted, and shaped. So surveillance capitalism is the economic translation of digital surveillance and control into an economic model. And so this is based on how data is extracted without meaningful consent. Prediction here becomes a commodity, and behavior is nudged, manipulated, and automated. There are three core mechanisms at the base of surveillance capitalisms. Mechanisms or concepts such as behavioral surplus, when data are not needed for service, are harvested for profit. So the collection of data doesn't have any service for the society based on this economic system, but this collection of data is going just is finalized just at profiting. Prediction products, when AI models predict future behavior, such as shopping and voting. Behavior modification, because users are nudged to act in profitable ways, of course, because data are collected for profit, and then these data are used to train algorithms that are going to nudge users to act in a profitable ways, like endless scroll and emotional triggers, because the endless scroll then will make the user more victims of advertising. And so how these link to bias, because these models often work better on dominant groups, and then marginalizing others by design means creating a new kind of disparity. And in this sense, in surveillance capitalism, the user is not the customer. So the real business model works in this way. Users is seen as raw material from which collecting data. The advertisers are the real customers of this economic model. And then the platform goal is maximizing user engagement to sell attention. As we saw in our first class, this is also called the economy attention. The attention economy. And the attention economy is part of surveillance capitalism. Let's say that surveillance capitalism is the political understanding of the attention economy. And so the problem here is that there is no incentive to care about, in this model, there is no sense for tech companies to care about fairness, diversity, or truth, but just to think about the amount of clicks and the amount of data that can be possibly collected. Big tech companies have a role here, of course. What do Google, Facebook, TikTok really do? They are not just tools for connection, but they are attention extraction machines. So these digital platforms are designed to capture and monetize user attention as long as possible. And to do this, they rely on powerful AI algorithms that analyze our data and predict what keeps us engaged. So how do biases come into play here? Because, some example, racial profiling in advertising, ads may target users differently based on race or inferred identity. And if data in which these algorithms are biased, then different categories, different groups of society will be more targeted by this advertising campaign. And then gender-based content recommendations also is another example in which biases come into play, because women might see beauty tips and men see finance even without asking for it. This is going to replicate some our society historical inequalities. But of course, you can see how these digital technologies, which are not made, we should be created for increase the social good, are just going to replicate our historical inequalities. And the key point is that if systems are not aimed at being fair, as much fair as possible, then we will fall into capitalism, surveillance capitalism economy. And so these AI systems are built just to be profitable. And in this surveillance capitalism, we will find also example of manipulations by design, because recommendation algorithms don't show the user the most true or most useful content, but they show what's most engaging, even if it is misleading, polarizing, or extreme. And this because this most engaging content keep the user on the hook. And how the system do that? With outrage, as we saw in our previous class, with strong emotions and with simple answers, because outrage works better than nuance. In these controversial posts rise faster and achieve a wider public easily strong emotions win over accuracy because anger, fear, excitement drive clicks, drive users' attention, and simple answer beat complex truths because conspiracy spread easily and better than fact based on data. And the consequences are echo chambers and epistemic bubbles, and division and polarization, and as we saw in our previous class, in the third one, the spread of misinformation and the loss of critical thinking and common ground. And an important aspect of surveillance capitalism, sorry, a moment. An important aspect of surveillance capitalism is the illusion of consent. We can read when we when we enter a digital platform, we have the possibility to read the terms of service, but how many of us has ever read these terms? Probably no one, because they are long, complex, and full of legal jargon. And so they are extremely inaccessible. And most users don't realize that their data is constantly collected, such as browsing, location, clicks, voices, etc. Consent then is assumed, is not really given. And then the system or the digital platform is built around a passive acceptance and not informed choices. And therefore, surveillance capitalism requires our behavior, our data, and then our attention, but not our active participation or understanding. And is surveillance capitalism our present and our inevitable future? I would say that this is not a technological destiny, but it's a political and economic decision, that's for sure. Other paths are possible, such as decentralized data ownership, according to which we can own and control our data, and this control might not be something, let's say, a corporation's privilege. Another path relates to the AI for the public good. Models should be developed by public institutions, maybe, not just by private firms, and regulation and oversight, because democratic control over digital is important over digital infrastructures. So this means that we can build a digital ecosystems that respect privacy, diversity, and fairness, but only if we demand this principle to be the base of our AI systems. And so the key point is that it is not too late to redesign how our digital technology and digital society work, but it requires will and action and awareness, I would add. How this impact on democracy? Surveillance capitalism doesn't just affect individuals, it reshapes society inevitably, and democracy relies indeed on shared truths, open debates, and autonomous citizens. But if platforms control what people see, algorithms prioritize profit over truth, and most data flows through corporate hands, then the public discourse is distorted and power is privatized. And for this reason, then, digital spaces should be considered as less pluralistic, less transparent, and less democratic. And when knowledge becomes a product, then the democratic system becomes fragile. Why it all connects? Because this recap is important because surveillance capitalism incentivizes maximum data collection, including sensitive or biometric data, psychographic and predictive profiling, behavioral modulation such as nudging and personalized ads. In this context, biases become tools of segmentation and control because they exploit existing inequalities to increase predictive accuracy. And algorithmic discrimination then is not just a side effect, but it is a characteristic of the surveillance system that works for efficiency and profits. This aspect is extremely important, especially that existing inequalities are going to increase predictive accuracy because people maybe most of the time are not aware of the structural, systemic, cultural inequalities they are victim of. And so they are not able to detect how the algorithms are going to replicate these inequalities in the digital systems. And so surveillance capitalism incorporates and exploits them, these biases, as a functional tools for predicting and conditioning behavior. And so this can lead to a systemic discrimination without any explicit intention. So if these historical inequalities are not completely aware in users, and then the AI systems replicate these discriminations, this is going to increase the accuracy of the recommendations. Because if, okay, this is maybe, it is important, this is subtle, if I am victim of something that I'm not aware, and then an algorithm is going to replicate this inequality, then this will be on my benefit, we can say that, because by being victim of something, I can also want and desire what that inequality entails on my person. And then something that replicates that inequality is going to increase the accuracy, and it is going to be apparently more efficient. But this because all these systems are not Hi everyone, I'm Ermanno Petrocchi, a PhD candidate in AA Ethics at the University of Macerata, and welcome to my fourth class of the course Technology and Digitalization of Civic Participation. I'm going to share the slides and then we can start the class. All right. Today we're going to talk about bias, fairness, and surveillance capitalism. And this is a summary of the class. We're going to introduce and frame the problem of algorithmic bias and algorithmic fairness and surveillance. And then we will delve into the understanding of algorithmic bias, digital surveillance and control, and then the concept of surveillance capitalism. To conclude the class, we will try to respond to some challenges that have been advanced to the concept of surveillance capitalism. The objectives of this class are understanding how algorithmic bias is produced and reproduced in digital systems, AI-based digital systems, learn how these systems impact real people, especially vulnerable and